Turn to the person next to you, if you would please. Just smile great big and say, I am a missionary. So glad you are here today. For those of you who are part of the Anderson campus family, we just want to say welcome. Those of you that have joined us online, we want to say how honored we are for you to take the time to join with us. And for those at the Pendleton campus, we want to say thanks for allowing yourself to be a part of the Faith Church family. So glad you are here today. We are in week number 2 of this series, I Am Samaritan. It's all based around the story in Luke chapter 10 about the man that we refer to as not just the Samaritan, he was the Good Samaritan. The thing that happened when Jesus told this story, though, they weren't thinking this was a Good Samaritan because they thought he was a Samaritan. And Samaritans were not appreciated in the Jewish culture. They were half-breeds. They had a religion that was kind of watered down, and they were despised by the Jewish people. And Jesus tells a story of the Samaritan that we now refer to as the Good Samaritan. And every once in a while when you're a pastor, and by the way, if you ever have a chance to be a pastor, you ought to take that gig because it's absolutely incredible. And if you ever get to be a pastor, you'll find out that sometimes God sets you up for certain things that you're going to be preaching about. And we're preaching on the Good Samaritan, and God gave our family a Samaritan story just 2 weeks ago. My son Grant is in college, and he's in Minneapolis, and he was driving from Minneapolis to join our family at the Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri. Pretty long trip, and he'd been ministering on Sunday morning. They didn't leave until somewhere close to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so he's going to be traveling late at night. And I started to feel uncomfortable about that as a dad. Then I realized there isn't a college student on the planet that goes to bed before 2 in the morning. And so we sent him on his mission. And on the way from Minneapolis to the Lake of the Ozarks, he had to cross through Iowa. And when he came through Iowa, they didn't have him on major highways. Whenever he used the maps program, it wound up taking him through some back roads in Iowa. And when I say back roads, I mean back roads. There are roads with no houses. There are roads with no shoulder. There's roads with no people. And he's traveling the back roads, and all of a sudden he realizes that he loses his signal for his phone. Completely gone. Not 1 bar, not 2 bars, no bars, no signal whatsoever. So he's in the middle of what he thinks is a third world country. And as he's traveling down the road with no cell coverage, he says the biggest raccoon he's ever seen in his entire life just jumped in front of him. And he described it, and he didn't say exactly this way, but the way I pictured it was that like a normal raccoon, if he got ready to be hit by a car, he'd kind of go, ah! And this raccoon just kind of toughened up and made muscles, one of those things. And so Grant accidentally hits the raccoon, and when he does, it breaks the spoiler on the car. He hits the radiator so hard, it bends the radiator, and all the antifreeze is spewing out. It breaks the fan housing, and all 4 fan blades come off. So parts are flying everywhere, not the raccoon of the car. It just, all of a sudden, might need some clarification right there. And it winds up that after all the parts have flown and he comes to a stop, it winds up that steam is coming out of the front of the car, and it's just overheating almost instantly. And he does the only thing he knows to do. He pulls it over to the side of the road that has no shoulder. And he decided he would try to call me for help. But he had no signal. He didn't even know where he was, and so he decided he would go out and he'd start to wave people down, and people would drive by very rarely on this road, and when they drive by, he would stand at the edge of the road, and he'd wave his hands like crazy. There's a car on the side with the lights blinking and steam going everywhere, and people just drive to the other lane and keep on going. And he couldn't find anyone to stop, so finally he made a determination that he would call 911 because he remembered that someone told him that you can call 911 even if you don't have cell coverage and they'll catch you. And it winds up that he called and they answered, and things were kind of sketchy and they could barely hear each other. But finally she asked this question. It's so important if you want to be rescued. Where are you? Thankfully, he could limit it down to the state of Iowa. So she says, well, I think we can locate you with some time. And so he waits and waits, and finally he decides they may not be coming. So he starts trying to wave people down, and the same routine. They see him, they pull over to the other lane. Finally, some guy stops, and Grant's thinking, this is finally a human who cares. And he stops, and he says, what's going on? He said, I ran over the world's biggest raccoon. And he looked at the damage. He said, that was a big raccoon, And he said, give me the jack to your car. And he raises it up, and he looks underneath, and he says, whoo, that's broken. And Grant said, yes, it is. And he says, underneath it, he's kind of looking at it, and he's shining a flashlight up in there. He goes, man, that's broken. He said, this is your lucky day, to which Grant isn't feeling like it's a lucky day. And he says, why is it my lucky day? And he says, because I just got out of jail today. So here he is on the back roads of Iowa with no cell phone coverage, with no one around except one person that got out of jail that day. And he doesn't know whether he's, committed murder or what he's done. And the guy says, don't worry, they just got me for stealing something. But he says, I didn't do it. Which I'm sure there's a wink that came right after that, right? And Grant says, well, it's okay, man. He says, I've already called the police and they're on their way. So he's kind of letting them know, in case you're thinking about murdering me, the police are on their way. And he says, oh, you need to call them off. And Grant goes, what do you mean? He says, I'll take care of you. You can call the police off. And so about the time Grant's getting ready to call the police off, an officer pulls in right behind him. And he's thinking, I have been rescued. This is the moment he's been waiting for. And he says he was shocked to find out that they greeted each other by first names. When you're in first name basis with the guy who arrests you, there might be issues, one of those things. And so they greet each other on a first name basis. And the guy that was there that was helping him said, hey, you don't need to worry about anything. I'll take care of it. And Grant says, well, man of wisdom. He says, maybe, Mr. Officer, could you drive me to a hotel? And he says, well, we're in Uniontown. There is no hotel in Uniontown. And he says, yeah, but there's got to be one somewhere in the state. Could you take me to the nearest hotel? And to which the officer replied, I'd like to, but I can't. He says, because if I were to have a call, emergency call or something, I had to put you out right alongside the road, leave you out alongside the road, to which Grant's thinking, that's where I am. It can't be any worse than what's going on. And then we're also thinking, how many emergency calls do you get in Union City, Uniontown, whatever, I think it's Uniontown. How many emergencies do you get at midnight? But sure enough, he didn't take them. And the guy says, I got you covered. He says, you can come to my house. This is where maybe things started to break down for Grant, and so he didn't want to hurt the guy's feelings, and he was the one guy who stopped, and so he said, well, I guess that's better than staying out here alongside the road. And so it winds up that he takes him to what he said was his house, but technically it wasn't his house, it was someone else's house. It was his girlfriend's house. See, this is where it gets real interesting, because his girlfriend was married. You're like, you can't make this up, right? And he just got out of jail too. And so she unknowingly has a boyfriend and a husband. She's at the trailer, and it winds up that the boyfriend and the husband show up at the trailer at the same time. Uh-oh is right. So it winds up that Grant now is behind the guy who's the boyfriend, who doesn't know that the husband has just come in where the boyfriend is and the woman is. And the guy walks in and says, hey, I told this guy he could stay in your trailer. And he looks around, Grant looks around and goes, I realize it was a small trailer. There were 7 kids, 3 dogs, 3 cats that he counted. He thought he heard more. There was a boyfriend, a husband, the woman, and Grant in the trailer. And he said, let me show you to your room. So Grant's thinking, at least they can get me in a room, I can rest. And he finally asked to use the phone. And when he called me, he says, hey, the guy here said we can stay at his house. But the guy standing right in front of him. So he can't say, help, send help, one of those things. Call 911. He can't do it. So he says, oh, he's really nice. Everything's going to be fine. I'm thinking he's really nice and everything's going to be fine. And he says, we're going to get up at 7:30 and work on the car. And he says, if you want, you could come and get me. And I said, I'm on my way, So I'm thinking everything's pretty cool. He takes him to the bedroom, and he said, this is your bed. There's no sheets on it, no pillows, no bedspread, just a mattress, and it had stains all over it. And he said he found the one part of the mattress that was less stained, and he threw stuff on it, and then he laid on top of that. And he said just about 1 o'clock in the morning, he's thinking, maybe I might be able to fall asleep, but the dogs are barking, the cats are meowing, the kids are playing video games. And now, at 1 o'clock, the woman, the boyfriend, and the husband start fighting. It gets to be pretty bad fighting, all right? Like, bad, go to jail kind of fighting. And Grant's sitting in the room. He can't hear all the conversations, but he's thinking, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. And finally, the one thing he can pick out a conversation every once in a while is one man says to the other man, I ain't afraid to go back to jail. And the other guy goes, I ain't afraid to go back to jail either. And Grant's going, I'm afraid of dying. That's what I'm afraid of. They fight until 6 o'clock in the morning. At 6 o'clock in the morning, they didn't call a truce. They decided it's time to beat each other up. And so they just beat the living daylights out of each other. And he doesn't know who drives away, but someone drives away with some of the kids. And he's sitting in the bathroom thinking, if I could just get to a phone that has a signal. And he wanted to borrow their phone, but it's really difficult, he said, to go, can I borrow your phone and call the police? And so Grant gets up early in the morning thinking, everything's falling apart, and he gets out of the house as quickly as possible. His car, was able to drive it that little distance to get it to that house, and he goes out and waits in the car. The guy said he'd be there at 7:30 in the morning, and guess what? The guy who stayed up until 6 o'clock in the morning fighting showed up at 7:30, just like he said. He said, hey man, how you doing? I hope you had a good night's rest. Grant lied. And said, yeah, it wasn't bad, one of those deals. And he says, hey, let's see if we can get your car fixed. And so they started looking at the car, and he says, you're going to need some parts. He says, let me drive you to the nearest parts store, which is 1,000,000 miles away. And he drives the guy to the parts store, and they don't have the parts that they need, but he drives them all the way back. And he says, man, I'm sorry, I won't be able to help you. I got to go to work, but if you need anything, you let me know. He says, we got water in there. And he cares for my son. And by the time I get there, Grant's just, laying in the ground sucking his thumb, one of those deals. Not at all. He was cool with everything. And by the time I get there, he said, man, this has been a really weird day. And if Jesus were telling this story, and you were the crowd, I think this is what he'd say. In the story, who was the one that had compassion? Who was the neighbor? And who was the neighbor? Does anyone know? It was the guy that just got out of jail. That's the guy. And it is, as simple as that answer is, it's kind of awkward. When you're in a situation where you need help, and that was the best out of everyone that was on the highway that day. Jesus tells a very similar story in Luke chapter 10. And the story went like this. There's a guy that was on his way to Uniontown, or Jericho. And as he was in the back roads and there was no signal, someone jumped up, beat the living daylights out of him, took his stuff, took his clothes, and left him for dead alongside the road. Police officer drove by. Well, it was actually a pastor. And the pastor drove by, and he swerved to miss him. And it winds up that, the youth pastor came with a van full of teenagers, and he swerved to miss him. And then finally, a Samaritan came. And everyone in the crowd goes, oh. It would be a lot worse than that situation where, I said, well, a guy that you didn't know, he might have been a murderer came. I mean, they're just like going, the Samaritan came. Everyone knows you can't trust the Samaritan. And when he said that, they're thinking, he's gonna kick that guy while he's down. If he has anything left, he's going to take his stuff. This Samaritan, if that guy had a bad day, man, he got robbed, the religious people are passing by, now a Samaritan, it's over for this guy. He's going to cut his throat. And instead, Jesus says, it was the Samaritan that knelt down, tended his wounds, poured oil and wine on them, symbols of healing and God's Holy Spirit. He wrapped him in bandages. He put him on his own donkey and took him to a nearby town where he took him to a med check, which was an inn during the time. There were people there that would house you and take care of you. And he said, by the way, don't charge this guy. He just got robbed. Right? This guy's had a rough time. He says, I'll pay for it. Whatever it is, I'll pay for it. What if he doesn't have insurance? It's okay. I'm going to pay for it. Don't make that guy pay for it. I'll pay for it. And Jesus turns to the crowd and says, who was the one that had compassion? Who was the neighbor? And everyone in the crowd, as awkward as it was, knew the answer was clear. It was the Samaritan, the half-breed, the man who had a cheap religion. He took Judaism and they watered it down. And it says, Jesus makes this statement in Luke 10, verse 37. Jesus told him, the guy that asked, who's the neighbor? And he says, it's the Samaritan. He says, go and do likewise. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Go be like a Samaritan. And when he said that, everyone in the crowds, their eyes are crossed and they're going, what do you mean, go and be a Samaritan? Samaritans have a really bad religion. It's watered down. They don't got the religion that we have. And this is what Jesus, I think, underlined. This is the message. Jesus is saying this. If your religion doesn't care for hurting people, then your religion is worthless. If your religion doesn't go outside the walls, then your religion is worthless. This is what Jesus is saying. I'd rather have someone with bad theology and compassion than someone that has good theology and doesn't care about hurting people. And I don't think Jesus has changed. I think his declaration, his desire is the same. You could have good theology but don't have compassion, and it doesn't matter. You can have bad theology and have compassion on hurting people, and Jesus is pleased. And I'm not advocating for bad theology. What I'm advocating for is really good compassion. And the most compassionate people on the planet should not be Samaritans. The most compassionate people on the planet must be followers of Jesus Christ. Thank you for the 4 people that are amening. And today we're going to talk about compassion, the 5 C's of compassion. It'll be real quick, but take notes, please. The first C of compassion is change. Compassion changes your priorities. The Samaritan got something that I struggle with. All right, he did. He got something that I struggle with. Because I'm a goal-oriented guy. How many people here are goal-oriented people? How many people here make a list of what you need to do during the day? How many people, if you didn't put something on the list and you did something, you write it in on the list anyhow and cross it off? Right? That's me. And so I'm goal-oriented. I want to get there. And I don't care sometimes about the process from here to there. I just want to get there. And the Samaritan had something down that I struggle with, and that is that where he was going was not as important as where he was. Christians, listen to me. Where you are going is not as important as where you are. There has got to be something inside of the heart of every believer that says, my goal is not to get to there. My goal is to see who God wants me to touch in between here and there. See, he had that built into his lifestyle. He knew that there would be moments in life that looked like distractions. They looked like inconveniences, but they weren't distractions and inconveniences. They were God-directed appointments. You see, there's times in my life that I see things as inconveniences that I think God sent, and they aren't supposed to be inconvenient. And I'm sure none of you have ever missed those opportunities. But there's this tendency to say, you know what, in the process of getting from here to there, I can overlook. Just keep looking forward. Keep looking straight. I don't need to look to the right. Don't need to look to the left. If I see something in my peripheral vision, just kind of drive in the other lane and go back around. I've got to get from here to there. And I miss out on the opportunity to touch the lives of people on the journey. God is more interested in the journey than the destination. And I realized that, again, this week, it's something that I practiced at other times in my life, and I started kind of putting this on hold a little bit. And I have to make 2 lists in my life. I'm kind of the Martha kind of person, the Martha and Mary. I like to slow down, and I like to worship Jesus like Mary does, but I also like to get things done like Martha does. And neither one of them are wrong. It's just the way that we're wired. And I'm a Martha person. This week, it was Tuesday or Wednesday, I came home from a long day at church. And we've had meetings all week long. It's probably, 16, 17 hours I put in. So it winds up, I get home and Renee goes, how's your day? And I say, it's long. And she says, well, because she knows I like to tell her what I did because I like to mark things off the list. And she says, so what did you do today? And I said, nothing. And she looked at me and smiled, and she said, you did something. I said, no, I didn't do anything. And she said, you didn't do anything all day long. You just lay in a coma. And I said, no, I didn't lay in a coma. I just didn't get anything accomplished. And I realized when I said it, I had cherished my Martha list. I started my Martha list on Monday. Actually, I have a carryover list, and I carried it over, and then I usually start on Monday marking things off the list, and I started on Monday, and I didn't mark anything off my list, and we got to Tuesday, and I didn't mark anything off my list, and we got to Wednesday. I'm putting all these hours. I didn't mark not one thing off my list, not one, none. Zero, zilch. If you're a Martha person, that's a bad day. And I realized that I need to have a Martha list and I need to have a Mary list. And every once in a while, I need to slow down and make a Mary list. And when I did, this is when I could go back to Renee and say, oh, today I got a lot of things accomplished. Martha didn't get anything done, but Mary got a lot of things done. And I said, you know what? I started, but I didn't even expect it, but someone just kind of wandered in and they needed some help. And someone said, could you come over here and could you help me work on this because I can't afford to have that done. And then I ministered here and I prayed for this person here and I called this person. And by the time I got done, I had this list of things that were Mary moments, those moments where I was doing things for Jesus Christ. And then when Renee could look at me and say, what did you do today? I could look at my list and go, I did a whole bunch of Mary stuff. And sometimes Martha people really struggle with the Mary mentality. And so I want to encourage you, if you're a person of compassion, realize that it changes your priorities. Number 2, it challenges. It challenges us to touch. You see, we live in a culture that no longer touches, that we communicate through electronics, and I'm not bemoaning that at all. What I'm saying is that we have little human contact. We have little human touch. In fact, human touch is considered in our culture to always have some kind of sensual connotation that goes along with it, and we're afraid of lawsuits. And I'm not talking about, the wrong kind of touch. It's just that humans need human touch. If you take a newborn and you meet all its needs and no one cares for it, loves it, or touches it, it will have psychological problems that will torment it the rest of its life. It will never be a normal child because every human being is created by God for human touch. And compassion compels us to touch the heart of another person. Compassion tells us that we can reach out and love someone else. Compassion tells us that there are people near you today that all they long for is for someone to look them in the eye and say, I care. For someone to lay a hand on the shoulder and say a prayer with them. For someone to smile. For someone to call them by name. We all long for human touch. I read just this week about a machine shop where they were making airplane camshafts. And these were so detailed and so precise because if they weren't exactly right, the plane could fail and fall to the ground. And so everything has to be done precisely. And on the machine where they are milling this camshaft, there was a sign that said this: remember that the warmth of your hand will change the diameter of the camshaft. That the warmth of your hand can change, it could cause steel to expand. And if the warmth of your hand can change steel, then how much more the warmth of your hand can change a cold heart. And today there's people near you, and tomorrow at work or wherever you're at, there'll be people near you that need human touch, and compassion will compel you to do so. Number 3, compassion compels. It compels us to heal, to offer God's grace and healing. And like the man in the story, it winds up that he pours out oil and wine, and he bandages the wounds, and he takes him to a place where he can be healed. And today, if you find someone in your life who's injured, who's hurting, who's in need, then there's going to be this compulsion that comes along with compassion that says that I want to offer you the healing of God's grace. And it's amazing how little it takes to bring healing. It's amazing how little you have to do and how few words you can speak, and you can be an encouragement to those around you. And it compels us to offer healing. When we see wounded people who desperately need our attention, I guess if you see a guy alongside the road and he's bleeding, we have a tendency to have compassion almost instantly. When people are hurting, we have a tendency to feel their physical pain. But there's people in your world, there's people today in this place that they walked into church and they have wounds that you cannot see. Wounds of the soul, wounds of the heart. And they desperately need God's healing grace at work in their lives. There's people that love Jesus, but they need some help. They need some encouragement. There are people here that are in love with God. And there's those that unknowingly, you might, in the back of your mind, think, well, it's an emotional thing. Just get over it. But sometimes you just can't get over it. Sometimes you don't have the ability to heal your own wounds. I fell from the roof of a 5-story building, landed on concrete, broken up pretty bad. No one would dare walk up to me and go, dude, get over it. I mean, really, it's just a wound, whatever wound is, fix it. But with emotional needs, sometimes we're that way. What if? What if we could treat the wounds of the soul like we do with the wounds of the physical body? And we just step in and say, you know what, I want to offer healing. And sometimes it's as simple as scooting down a couple of chairs and making sure someone's not sitting alone. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, how are you doing today? And let them tell their story. And guess what? There's going to be times that people tell their story, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But sometimes it takes time to heal. And so compassion always encourages to heal other people. 4, compassion cost. It'll always cost us something. Luke 10:34, about halfway through the verse, and 35, we see that it cost the Samaritan tremendously. But the investment that you make, when we see difference in the word cost and investment. Anybody here ever consider saving money for retirement? Anybody ever consider it? Not that you've done it, you're just considering it, right? Matter of fact, I have a Rickers Rewards card. Anybody have a Rickers Rewards card? Everybody ought to have one of those, because that's my retirement plan right there. All right, and if you have a plan, it's called an investment. It's not a cost. You invest in the future. And so this is really less of a cost and more of an investment. Then the Samaritan, put the man on his own donkey, right? And he had to walk as he took the man where he was going. He took him to an inn and took care of him. He took the med check. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins, 2 days' wages, and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. It cost something, but the reward of knowing that he was being used by God to minister to someone else outweighed the expense. He had this mentality that said, if the person is hurting, if the person has been robbed, if the person doesn't have enough, then we're not going to ask that person to pay. I'm going to step up and minister to that person's need. The question is not, will I have the opportunity to serve? The question is this, what will I do when the opportunity comes? Will we be like the religious who go through our list of excuses of why we can't help other people, or will we accept the Samaritan's challenge? And the last point is this. The C of compassion is it calls. It calls us to action. And action sometimes can be the smallest little thing that has the greatest impact. You can look back on your own life and you can identify the moments where people did little things that made huge differences in your life. And God explains it like this. He says, by the way, it's just a little prayer that makes a huge difference in someone's life. He explains it like this. He says, you could give a little glass of water in my name, and it doesn't go unnoticed in the heavenly realms. A little faith is enough to move a mountain. A little compassion is enough to change a heart. When I was getting the money that we're going to give away in just a little bit, I went to the bank and it was, one of those requests where I said, I'd like to have several $1,000s, please, in 20s and 50s and 100s, and they need to be just the amount. And the lady's going, ooh, that's kind of weird. I said, yeah. I said, our church is giving away money. And she said, say that again real slowly. I said, our church is giving away money. She says, I never heard that in my entire life. And I said, you won't be able to say that anymore. Our church is giving away money. And she says, oh, I get it. That is so cool. Like a random act of kindness. And I said, no, it's not like that at all. It's like a calculated act of kindness. You see, a random act of kindness that kind of goes, you know what, hey, I don't know you. I'm going to pay for lunch. But a calculated act of kindness is totally different. In fact, when you get your resources today, I want you to have calculated acts of kindness. I think it'd be a shame. Let me say that again. At the corner around our city, there are going to be people this afternoon with cardboard signs that said that they need some help. And I'm not opposed to helping them. I really am not. But that's a random act of kindness. And so if we all drive out, 400 people drive out of here this afternoon, and we all throw the money in one guy's lap, that would be one very happy guy at the street corner. But it's not the goal of what we're doing here. The goal of what we're doing here is we're saying, you know what? I know someone who needs help. It needs encouragement. Like I said, it could be anything. You could pay for a haircut. You could pay for lunch. You can make them cookies. You can do any number of things. And when you do so, you have to have a personal touch that goes along with it. And the personal touch is this. You just get a card and write in the card. Our church is doing this thing where we're just giving away money to bless someone else. And I wanted to bless you today. And I said a prayer for you. And give them, buy them something. Take it a step further. Don't just hand them money. Buy them something they need so that when they see it, it reminds them. If you're going to see someone and you don't have time to write a card or something like that, at least say, you know what, God put it on my heart. And maybe you're at Aldi's and you see someone and you think, you know what, I want to bless them. And you say, you know what, I just feel like God put you on my heart and I want to bless you. And our church is doing something incredible. I'm at Faith Church. And just connect what God's doing in your life to your generosity with someone else. And then all you're going to have to do after that is just, either write it or do some kind of thing on your phone and just download it or upload it to the church, and we'll take that and we'll piece it all together. It's that simple. All we're going to do is give away money. You ever wonder what would happen if you had a little extra? You ever thought about what you would do if you had a little extra? And if you have, today's the day that you have just a little bit extra. And we're gonna give that away, and we're gonna help some other people, all because of the compassion and kindness that God has put inside of you. It's not a drive-by moment. The Good Samaritan didn't just walk by and throw some bandages at a guy. He reached down and he ministered to his need. And so today, I want to encourage you. Make sure that you give God a chance to work through you. I read a story this week, and I'll wrap things up with this. It's a story told by Tony Campolo. Tony Campolo would walk to work and he would go through the inner city, and as he did so, he said from time to time he would pass someone who was homeless, and he said for the most part I just looked forward. He said every once in a while someone would ask for money and he would say no, and he said this particular day he was walking to work, and as he's walking to the work, it winds up that there was a bag lady that was walking out of the donut shop right as he was walking right past the donut shop. And as he walked right past the donut shop, it winds up that this bag lady opens the door and it stops Tony. And as he does so, he sees the bag lady, and he did what he did not intend to do. He looked her in the eyes. And when he did, he said, I just forced a smile and I moved on my way. And as he moved on his way, he said, he started to walk away thinking, just ignore her, just ignore her, just ignore her. And all of a sudden he hears her voice behind him. And she says, hey, mister, would you like a sip of my coffee? Tony did what you and I would probably do. He pretended he didn't hear, and he kept on walking. He said about a half a block away, something changed. And he spun around and shouted out, hey, lady, yes, I like a taste of your coffee. And he walked back to her as she walked to him, and she extended the cup of coffee, said her fingers were filthy, she smelled unclean. She smiled and handed him the cup. And he said he took the cup and he took a big sip, and as he did so, he said, you know what? It's true. It's the best coffee he'd had in a real long time. She looked at him, smiled, and said, isn't it good? And he smiled back. And he said, yes, it is good. And thank you. And then kind of spontaneously, he asked her this question. By the way, why did you offer me your coffee? And I think that her answer should be engraved on the heart of every follower of Jesus Christ. With a beautiful and simple answer, she says, because it was so good. I thought that someone might like to share it with me and enjoy it too. that's what the Samaritan Challenge is all about. If God has been good to you, and how many people agrees that God has been good to you, then maybe you might want to share him with someone else. So in just a moment, we're going to pray. I'm going to ask our elders and their wives, our ministry team and their spouses to come, and Pastor Carl has some envelopes and he's going to disperse those. And in just a moment, I'm going to ask those in the church family that said, you know what, God has been good to me, and I want to share him with someone else. I want to take the Samaritan's challenge. It's what Jesus challenged the crowd to do. Jesus looked at the crowd and said, by the way, I want you to be a Samaritan. I want you to have compassion. I want you to make a difference in someone else's life. I was at a service once in Bible college, and when I was in Bible college, the guy that was speaking grabbed his billfold and he says, hold your billfold in the air. And so I held my billfold in the air, and he says, everybody, get out your billfold, get out your money. And we held our billfolds in the air, and he says, now, hand that billfold to someone else. And I handed my billfold to the person next to me, and he handed his to me, and he says, now give like you always wanted to. And here's what I realized. I realized it's easy to give money away when it isn't mine. All right, and so today, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be able to give money away that isn't yours. Should be pretty easy. How many people can give money away if it isn't yours? All right, keep this in mind. All the money that you have has never been yours to start with. It's all God's, and he shared it with us. Shouldn't it be easy to share it with others? So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to come as households. So if you're a teenager and you're still at home, or college student still at home, we're going to ask you to come with your family, if you would, please, if you're willing to make a difference. If you're a college student and your parents decide they don't want to do it, you still represent the household, you can come up. But we're going to give away one envelope per household, either $20, $50, or $100. It's going to be random. And we're going to do that at the altars, and we're going to pray for you. So would you do that? If you'd like to take the Samaritan Challenge, would you come as a household, and would you stand up in the front and kind of bunch up a little bit, if you would, please? And as you come, here's what I want you to do. One person from each household, just raise your hand until someone puts an envelope in your hand, and then you can put your hand right back down. Come all the way up, guys. We're going to have to squeeze you in, all right? So just raise your hand until someone puts an envelope in your hand. One person per household. And you know what? I'm going to give my money away. Bless someone else. And here's one thing I want to point out as you're receiving the money. You don't have to open it up yet. We'll open it a little bit later. All right. As I was sharing with someone about where we're going to be heading, I had one person that said, but if you tell your story, isn't it bragging? And the answer to that is no, it's not bragging. It's called a testimony. If we're bragging at all, we're bragging on what God has given us the privilege to do. There's still some hands. You might have to raise your hands up. I can see people that other people can't see. Guys, if you can make your way to the altars, go ahead. Scooch. It's Jewish for scoot over a little bit. Wait long enough. Hey guys, we might have some guys go back here, or those people come up here. Over here on my left hand side, there's about 5 or 6 hands still raised over here. Got a hand right here that's been raised. There's 2 or 3 hands over on this side, so we're going to need your help. All right, so when you just hang around the altars for a little while, guys. We're going to pray. When you share your story, it's not bragging about what you've done. It's giving glory to God. And we're going to give glory to God. The word tells us that we overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. You're saying, well, Walt, I don't think $20 is going to make that big a difference in someone's life. It may not solve their problems, but it lets them know that you care. And it may not be just the money. Go out and buy something special. Multiply it somehow. Here's a crazy thing. Add your money to it. that lone voice. Amen. And we're going to share the stories about God's grace. Would you take that envelope and would you hold it in the air? Heavenly Father, we take the Samaritan's Challenge. Lord, take 20, 50, 100 bucks. Show us how to make a difference in someone's life. Maybe we'll buy something with it, resell it, and come up with more money. Maybe we'll add a little to it. Maybe we'll buy the ingredients for cookies. Maybe we'll invite someone to church and take them to lunch and tell them that we care, and we'll pray. Lord, there's so many things that we can do, and help us to be creative. Let us have a personal touch, whether it's writing a card or shaking a hand, inviting someone to church or to sit with us, Lord, that there would be something that connects people to who we represent. Lord, I pray that this money would have a tremendous impact on the lives of others, but my hope is it'll have a greater impact on us, that we get it, that where we're going is not as important as where we are. Help us to see that. And we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's sing one more time, and then we'll send you out to be Samaritans.